Well,
We're
hello
live.
everyone.
Sorry.
Uh, Hello everyone. We're back. Joe and Jan with another episode of Unspun. What number is this, Jan?
Number 60.
60, a portentous number. We're going to talk a little bit about William Burroughs. We just did a show on him, but he's a very important cultural guy, and so we wanted to cover him very completely. And there's some more information that I need. I'm doing research into him for a chapter in a book that Jan and I may be bringing out. Um, and so I need to have as much information about Burroughs as possible. The One of the things I want to do tonight is to ask people who watched the video, who have information that might be useful in this project, to contact me or Jan. You can contact Jan through the Gnostic Media website. You can contact me. Um, just my Gmail is joeatwell@gmail.com. Um, and Burroughs is very important because he is the kind of the last piece of a trio of individuals that were involved in the creation of the counterculture. Um, and these three are Gordon Wasson, who we have covered in depth, Carlos Castaneda. Again, we've done quite a bit on Carlos Castaneda, and Burroughs. So Wasson basically was the one who got into our culture first. He was very dignified. He was a banker, well spoken. And he brought us how wonderful it was to take magic mushrooms and how this was a way to have a spiritual advancement. This all turned out to be nonsense. The story that he wrote about the experience, which appeared in May 1957 Life magazine, was completely weaponized anthropology. Jan and I have gone through the story enough times. I don't think we need to do any debunking of it in this show. Um, Castaneda was actually debunked by Jan and an individual named Dr. Jay Fikes. Jay wrote a book about this, which is available. And again, the fantasies about the nature of the spiritual progress that you would, have if you took peyote, was being brought to the culture via someone who had connections into military intelligence, into the CIA in this case. Um, and then the third piece of this odd trio is William Burroughs, who is the individual who brought us ayahuasca. Now, Burroughs is, famous for being just a drug addict and a wastrel. He's a complete cultural demolition wrecking ball, and I'm going to go into that in some detail about how I think he is really very likely a lifetime actor, and that the story he tells about himself is probably incorrect. But this is just a supposition, but I do think it's something people might find interesting, and it should be out there as an idea. But Burroughs really isn't often cited as a member of basically of the government or of entities like the Federal Reserve or the Council of Foreign Relations that are plugged into the government. G. Gordon Wasson, we have the famous pay requisitions from MK Ultra and the CIA, so there's no issue about that. And I think that Fikes and Jan have done a good job with Castaneda, but with Burroughs, you have to dig a little bit. And the first thing, there are 3 points that I'm starting to do research in, and I wanted to ask anyone who hears this, who has information that can flesh out um, the subject that I'm bringing up, to contact us. The first one I want to cite is, Burroughs' family. His grandfather had produced the first calculation machine that was produced en masse. Family was very wealthy. Burroughs was a Harvard guy, but before that, he went to this really weird school. Los Alamos Ranch School. And I can't prove this, but I suspect it has strong Freemason connections. And this is because it was located on the 33rd parallel. In fact, it was the actual site of the atomic bomb project. And it isn't a wise tale, but a fact that Oppenheimer himself came to the school and asked to have the land given over to him for the atomic bomb project. This is evidently true. It's been verified by a few people. But anyway, so, I'd like to know more about this. This would be something that would really be useful because, as we've shown in the past, you have this strange connection between Freemasonry and government activity, CIA activity. So I would like to see if Burroughs comes from this. And I don't know. It's not necessarily the case that it would be so, but it would be very useful. Then the second point is that Burroughs was actually tapped, or in other words, was interviewed by Wild Bill Donovan, one of the founders of the CIA, for work in the OSS. Now, this is extraordinary. I mean, there's only a few people that I'm aware of that Donovan actually would have had interviews with concerning this. So the fact that Burroughs is one of these guys is very suspicious. And this is another area that needs to be fleshed out. That I don't have any details about the meeting or why they decided at that point not to bring Burroughs into the OSS. And I suspect, and again, this is just a conjecture, is that even at this point, they were thinking about the destruction of culture. And so Burroughs, I think, because of his debauched self, he was always struggling with drugs, and he was kind of a romantic. Yeah, he's kind of a romantic, a poet in a lot of ways. I think that they may have seen him as someone who could do more than just be a spook. I think they could have seen him as a lifetime actor at this point. Because Burroughs then, he goes to Vienna. This is a hotbed of OSS activity, but there's nothing to link that I know of link Burroughs into OSS activity when he's at Vienna. Now he comes back and he hooks up with other guys, Kerouac and Ginsberg. Now, we have exposed both of them, but specifically Ginsberg, I think, is well outed at this point as an operative of the overall plot to destroy culture. I think that, you can actually go into some of the stuff that we have done in the past and see that this is a very, clearly outed individual. And so the fact that Burroughs and Ginsberg are connected at this point, before Burroughs goes out to find his particular drug, is very significant. So Burroughs travels to Mexico City, purportedly because he wants to get away from being arrested. He's been involved in some petty criminal activity with drugs and not paying people, and he wants to get away from the U.S., he claims, and he goes to Mexico City, and then he enrolls in Mexico City College, 1950. Now, Mexico City College is another point of connection because it was known and is reported as being a hotbed of CIA activity. And so this is another area I'd love to have some help with, as to many writers reference this fact, but I don't have any of the documentation, can't find it. So if anyone has that, I'd appreciate that. So anyway, Burroughs just happens to go to this place where the CIA is active, Mexico City College, 1950. And here he meets Louis Marker. Now, this is getting extremely suspicious because Louis Marker worked for the CIC, which was the precursor to the OSS, or excuse me, was one of the
counterintelligence corps.
Counterintelligence, but it was under the control of Donovan, the one who had talked to Burroughs previously. And Marker, I would love to have more details about what Marker was doing for counterintelligence when he was in Germany post World War II. All that we know is that he was involved in both cryptology, he was decoding code, and he was also interrogating prisoners, which is both things that would have been done by J.D. Salinger at this point. So that's interesting. And Henry Kissinger was also involved in this. So Marker may have known Kissinger and actually may have been working with him. Love to have this information fleshed out. Now, Marker purportedly had a homosexual affair with Burroughs. This is not clear to me because, again, you have to, when you look at these guys, you have to think about, well, are they, their personality, is the personality being weaponized? And so obviously they want to push a gay agenda. The destruction of the nuclear family is the goal. They're going to make Burroughs into a kind of a superstar, an idol. And so, you know, what is he? Well, he's a heroin addict, he's a pedophile, he's a homosexual, and he also murders his wife. So he's a real wrecking ball of culture. And so he has supposedly a homosexual relationship with Marker. Now, Marker's kind of this, in photographs, is kind of an owlish looking individual, sort of frail, strange looking character, comes from Jacksonville, Florida, if that helps anyone. Now, at one point, there was an altercation in this bar, the Bounty, and the owlish, frail Marker was able to basically nearly, render this individual unconscious with a few very, very expert martial art techniques. So he had evidently had training, that was kind of far beyond what, you just think of as looking about him. And if I think it's almost certain that Marker was sent down to basically be with Burroughs and to assist Burroughs in the first trip that Burroughs made.
Have you read Burroughs' Yage letters?
I'm
mean,
going
it's
but
hideous, but I do recommend you read it because it's it's clearly Burroughs' field notes that he's writing to Ginsberg, and it, to me, it looks like Ginsberg is his handler.
Right. But, I think that's true at that time. There were
2 points. I'll go back through it and see if I can find a mention Marker in there.
Yeah.
And also is now I just lost the train of thought on the second point. Never mind, but go ahead.
Well, the fact is
he talks about another murder in that he does right at the beginning of the book. They start off with a murder that Burroughs does.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to talk about that a bit. But so there were 2 trips, which is something that I think most people don't realize, is that Burroughs made 2 trips to find Yagi or ayahuasca. The first one was with Marker, and they went to Peru, and they really evidently had, according to Burroughs, not much success finding the drug. And the cover story for this was that Burroughs wanted to find Yagi because it would help him with telepathy. He was interested in telepathy.
Right. And that one of the early names they called ayahuasca, or, the combined compounds, was telepathine.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And so, this telepathy.
Can you sit forward just a little bit, Joe? You're cut off in the camera view there.
So the telepathy angle was being studied by MK Ultra. I don't think that anyone actually took it too seriously. I would have been surprised by that. What I think happens actually is that it's just like a UFO kind of way to get people to believe in fantasy and the Disneyland world that they're creating for everyone to wander into. And so the idea that they went down there to find telepathy as drug, I think is nonsense. But so they come back. Marker and Burroughs, and immediately thereafter, they kill the wife. Burroughs shoots his wife. Now, in the room, there was only four people: Joan Volner, who was shot by Burroughs, and um, Lewis Marker, and a guy named Eddie Woods. Now, Eddie Woods is a big question mark, John. I don't know anything about this guy, but I really would like to find out. He knows Marker, but I don't know if Eddie Woods is in military intelligence or the Freemasons or what. He's a friend of Marker who comes down, and he's one of the two witnesses to the shooting. The shooting, the timing of the shooting, I think is very suspicious because, um, in between the two trips to gather this ayahuasca, it is, of course, the thing you would wonder about is Joan Volmer becoming aware of basically what Marker and Ginsburg are up to?
Joe,
Yeah.
didn't Ginsburg kill his wife or girlfriend by the name of what was it, Elise Cohen or something, who was Joyce Glassman's best friend, Daniel Pinchbeck's best friend? Didn't she either committed suicide or Ginsburg killed her, but Ginsburg was the last guy that was ever with her, apparently.
Right. My memory is that she committed suicide, but I could be wrong. I don't have that detail clear. Um, Volner, Burroughs' wife is purportedly shot. Basically, the story is it was kind of a William Tell accident, um, which of course seems absolutely ridiculous because the idea of shooting a glass off someone's head at close range, it would produce glass shards all over the place. Now, of course, the claim is that Burroughs is, um, out of his mind, so perhaps it wouldn't have been something that occurred to him. But so following this. This event where you had Lewis Marker and Eddie Woods in the room when Volner was shot. Uh, then Burroughs is bailed. Well, he's actually bribed out of murder charges by his family. They came down there with $20,000, which was a huge sum of money. Bribed everyone. Burroughs got out, and so then he took the famous trip that the Augie letters are about. And this is why I haven't read the book, is because it just isn't as yet in the area of research that I'm doing. And I'm going to read it now.
Speaking.
Yeah, I mean, now, because this is a point in time, when he went to with Ginsburg, and then they supportedly found ayahuasca. So anyway, I want to say that the context of the Life magazine 1957 article is absolutely critical to look at Ginsburg through, because that context shows, an absolutely clear-cut operation centered inside the CIA, which is designed to damage culture. Here with Burroughs, you have the same operation. You have someone from military intelligence. I mean, for example, Wasson was with James Moore, who was a CIA botanist, right?
Right.
And that fact didn't come out for it was.
Well,
it was,
they, the CIA paraded James Moore about as a scapegoat to cover up the whole operation for decades. They brought him out in '79 on ABC TV, as well as in John Mark's book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate. And of course, John Marks was I know for sure he was the assistant to the director, but he may have been later the director of the Bureau of Intelligence and Research for the U.S. State Department. So it's like the Fox Watch and the Hen House sort of thing.
The limited hangout.
Right.
And so, here you have all of these parallels, and particularly when you look at what can be determined now about the stories, because in Castaneda and Gordon Wasson, you were very clear that the stories about the shaman, the spiritual leader individual who's going to use these drugs and show you how to do it and take you on this trip, and this is a something that has been vetted historically, because they're always talking about the ancient
Well,
traditions.
and Joe, if you remember just last week when we were doing the show, somebody wrote in the notes that they actually lived down there and lived with the Huichol, and they knew all of the people and knew that Jay was telling the truth. So, whoever that was, maybe, if you're listening to the show now, send us a note, or, maybe we can bring you on in the future to talk about this as well if
Yeah,
you're
that's really
listening.
powerful testimony. Because of course that also gets into Castaneda, which is a good area to flesh out. But with Wasson, you have this, how the story was constructed to basically enable the rock stars to combine their music and with drugs and get people to think that they were on this kind of spiritual path that was an ancient one, right? It was very important that it was ancient, that it was an archaic revival, that this was a tradition. It made it seem safe. It made it seem like it was a spiritual path that the modern world had overlooked.
Absolutely
And
right.
so by walking down it, you were rebelling. You were getting back to the real spiritual path that the ayahuasca cults had been following since the beginning of time. According to
Well,
Burroughs.
and since you're bringing that up, for those who didn't catch the last couple shows where we've been covering that history, we should probably state that basically the history with ayahuasca begins in 1851.
Yeah.
And then it's promoted really as a religion by the rubber industry, ironically. But,
Yeah.
and in fact, here, let's pull up Santo Daime here. And we have Raimundo Irino Serra, or Maestro Irino, who launches the Santo Daime. And then, so I do have that connected to the native revival here. And then the Uno de Vegetal is started by Jose Gabriel de Costa, or Maestro Gabriel. And then these guys both work for the rubber tapping industry in, I think it was in Brazil. And I need to flush that out more as well. But this is really, we have the rubber industry when they're getting the natives in the 1800s to go into the jungles to tap rubber. I think this is really the origins of it. And then, like we discussed from the original Aztec reports and the Florentine Codex, those histories are switched, and it looks like the Aztecs seriously frowned upon mushroom use in the public by what the Florentine Codex says. And then we have the reports of the many thousands of human sacrifices and suicides that also took place. And then Singer, who is a ethnomycologist investigating the mushrooms around the same time as Wasson in Mexico. He came out and reported, and I'll have to pull it up, I've got it in my citations, but he came out and reported that the Aztecs were using the mushrooms to prepare their victims for human sacrifice and suicide. And then Wasson attacks him and says, basically, this mycologist was, creating a fancy. So, anyway, somebody actually tracked down the original citation for me in the French National Museum. They just happened to live a few blocks away from the French National Museum, and so they went over there and actually got the original report, and it was, in fact, Singer who Wasson was trying to throw under the bus there. But when we get into the Florentine Codex and we look at the Aztec reports, as well as Sahugin's reports and Diego Duran's and Modellini's, the Spanish reports, they all pretty much, they're fairly consistent. And then we have the archaeological digs showing the amount of blood and bones and things like that around the pyramids that substantiate everything. So this was, in fact, a big death cult. And then, Wasson comes in and he takes the whole story. He finds Maria, which is a spiritual sounding name like Mary, and he converts her from this Catholic poor Mazatec woman who was a curandera curer, and he converts her into Saint Maria Sabina, the goddess of magic mushrooms, of this historical mushroom religion that he in fact concocted and put together piecemeal from reports that he got of, he would roll into some Indian town and then ask a guy a few questions about mushrooms, write it down, and depending on what the guy said or whatever, it was good information. Then he would go to the next one. So he did this to about 13 tribes, and he writes down, one person's opinion about it. And then he meets Maria Sabina. And, he had met Aurelio, the one-eyed butcher, the one-eyed Mazatec butcher from Oaxaca, Mexico. And, that guy sounded more like Jack the Ripper than, a spiritual person that Wasson wanted to portray, as well as the other 11 people that Wasson met that he discusses in Mushrooms, Russia, and History. And then he gets to Maria Sabina. She sounds spiritual. Her name is Mary. She's more, she fits the image better than any of the others that Wasson, as the public relations head of J.P. Morgan Bank, working with Henry Luce and the CIA and the Century Club, etc., to manufacture this whole thing. So Maria Sabina works the best for their whole marketing plan for the May 13, 1957 Life magazine piece at all. And then, so we can see this history that Wasson created. And then we can see the history that Carlos Castaneda and Barbara Meyerhoff and Peter T. Fierce manufactured around peyote and the Huichol Indians. And we can see how Kuwana Parker basically helped, working with Roosevelt, helped to sell peyote as a new religion into the United States in the in the 1890s. But prior to that, there was no history of peyote use in the United States and Canada, North America regions, prior to about 1851, which is the same year that we begin to see the reports of ayahuasca showing up. And so, we have this same theme, essentially, with Carlos Castaneda, and then with et al., and then Gordon Wasson and crew, and then William Burroughs and crew. So it's the same theme where they're manufacturing it, they're going out there, they're finding it, all around the same time. Burroughs starts his search, at least Yage Letters opens in 1953, January 1953. Wasson is starting his research in Mexico in 1953, and I don't remember when, I'd have to go back and check when Carlos Castaneda was doing the work on the Huichol, but then we have, all of these follow-ups sort of reinforcing this whole archaic revival, native revival theme that we see in Gregory Bateson's OSS letters, revealed by Price, that is then repeated and expanded upon in Terence McKenna's work, who was working with Gregory Bateson at the Esalen Institute as the scholar in residence, and then also that goes right into somebody else that you've been investigating that I investigated a couple of years ago, Joe, and that's Joseph Tussman and the Tussman Experimental College, where Terence McKenna went to school for a number of years. And, and there's another thing I wanted to point before I give it back to you. And, McKenna, before he was going down looking for psychedelics, he was in East Timor in 1970-71, right before all the CIA actions exploded in East Timor. So, we have similar themes, and then McKenna admits that he was involved in deep background. So, and then they shifted him into public relations. Well, what was Gordon Wasson? Public relations. What was Tim Leary? Public and social relations.
Can I interject just one thought? Because
Yeah.
I'll give it right back to you. I just wanted to say that Tussman, where McKenna went to school, is very important. And it's someone I really want to get to the bottom of, because he was in the OSS, and he was in the same region that Gregory Bateson was. And so the question I have is, were they working together? They both had very similar backgrounds in psychological training, and they were in the same area working for the OSS. And so when Bateson created the archaic revival, native
revival, yeah.
theory, the question I have is, was Tussman working with him at that time? Because then this makes the connection into McKenna's using the expression completely clear cut. So Tussman needs to be investigated in terms of his relationship to Bateson.
Right. As well as his relation to McKenna and, what the Tussman Experimental College was all about. And there was two of them.
Yeah.
There was another Tussman Experimental College over at, I believe it was at the University of Madison, Wisconsin. Yep, Wisconsin-Madison. And so, and then this guy, Joseph Tussman, is apparently working under Alexander Meiklejohn. And then we see Meiklejohn showing up on the cover of Time Life, which of course is run by Henry Luce, who is the same guy who publishes the 1953 piece for Gordon Wasson. So it appears that there is a very tight-knit, group again happening here with the early creation of these psychedelic religions and these schools. I mean, the background appears to be the same when we begin to go up the ladder here, and then right there, we're back to Tim Leary, C.D. Jackson, Gordon Wasson, Aldous Huxley. Right back in the thick of it, one step away from this guy, which then goes back to Tussman, and then there's McKenna. And then McKenna's whole expansion, basically psychedelic revolution 2.0, as Leary and those guys get too old. Then Terence McKenna, who admits that he's recruited, and they switch him into PR, where he's been ever since. And then he kicks off all of this stuff. And then we see him heavily influenced by the exact same people, working with the same people, etc.
Right. Well, the point I'm trying to make is that you basically have an academic cell. You have actually a cell which is designed to destroy culture, or to support itself in the creation of a fictional story. You have Gordon Wasson finding this ancient drug-based spiritual culture in Mexico. Castaneda finds another one, a separate one that uses peyote. And then you have Burroughs in Peru and Colombia finding yage. In all cases, they claim that there is an ancient wisdom spirit tradition based around.
Check this out. So what does the Harvard crew do? Okay, so the Harvard crew, composed of Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and Michael Hollingshead et al., including Ralph Metzner, they create the connection to the Tibetan Book of the Dead and the mystical experience, and then tie LSD to the Eastern religion at the same time. And then Carl Ruck and Albert Hoffman, with Gordon Wasson as well, come in and then write The Road to Ulysses, where they then say LSD has an ancient religious tradition all the way back to Ulysses. So here, then we see them actually doing the exact same thing with LSD as well, arguing that LSD is actually an ancient religious thing because of the Eleusinian mysteries.
Right, and you can see the pattern is very clear. Is they're trying to create a belief that there was ancient spirit cultures that were focused on drug taking, on DMT or LSD specifically, kind of drug taking. So everyone is working together, and so when you see the connections basically into the CIA or into Freemasonry that all these individuals share, then you know that you're actually dealing with an operation. I mean, of course, first of all, just by the exposure of Gordon Wasson and MK Ultra what you're dealing with. So everything just makes perfect sense. And Burroughs fits right into this, and that's why the character Lewis Marker is so important, and his background into counterintelligence, his relationship to William Donovan, potential relationship to Kissinger. All of these things need to be fleshed out because we want to be able to tell the public the clearest possible story about how culture was damaged. All of this is eventually going to end up with the destruction of the family, but this particular component was to basically promote mysticism, sexuality outside of marriage, and just the idea that a non-technologic, archaic type world was really one that was more conductive for spiritual growth. So now I was going to just talk briefly about Burroughs and an idea that I have, which I will have a hard time basically finding much out about, but I want to appeal to the hive mind because like Terence McKenna, I think his drug taking is bogus, right? I think it's been to some extent exposed that he stopped taking drugs at a certain time, even though after that he was advocating, this big drug use stuff.
Well, what's funny is Bruce Damer exposed him, of all people.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, I really wonder about Burroughs because, Burroughs' personality is absolutely perfect to plug into this. And he's such an eccentric. It may have been the case that
I think Burroughs was out of his mind most of the time.
Could well be. I've seen a lot of videos of him, and I really don't see and I don't detect any of the attributes of heroin addiction. I pretty much know about this. I've known people who are addicts. I've seen it quite often, and I think they have a very, very characteristic personality.
In Yage letters, he does talk about getting clean at one place when he was down there so he could carry on.
Right, for sure. Well, certainly when he was making the Yage video, which is on the internet and is completely fictional, or in my opinion, it's just ludicrous. His voice tenor is not someone who is taking heroin. I mean, at that point, he certainly was not taking heroin. But my point is that this guy is weaponized. In other words, sure. they're trying to put the idea that because if you look at what is public about Burroughs, he's a homosexual, he's a pedophile, and he's a heroin addict, and he murders his wife. And then he also writes this kind of creepy and weird literature, which is promoted by all of these individuals as the greatest thing since Shakespeare, right? Well, that package looks very suspicious to me. It's as like the attributes of his personality are artificial. The accolades for his creepy literature.
Well, sure, Joe. Well, look at even another level of that. What does that say about the CIA and these guys for promoting somebody like that?
Well, I mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, they are simply promoting him to damage culture. So that's why it really would be wonderful to know what transpired when William Bill Donovan, who is a Knight of Malta, which is a very high level of Freemasonry in the United States, met with William Burroughs, and then somehow Burroughs headed off on this trajectory. Because I wouldn't be surprised if the personality that Burroughs was going to later project to the population was basically laid out for him at that point. Because I think even that far back, the plan to break apart culture, has its they would have been thinking about it. Now, I wanted to also mention another strand of origination. because the Macy conference, where Bateson was at, had a direct input into MK Ultra and into the idea of using eros and what's called by Herbert Marcuse polysexuality or pansexuality, where you can
Sure.
just
Well, pan, and look at what the word pan is, but another name of Satan, Pan.
right. Yeah, exactly. And but the point is that now this comes from, you can trace a strand back from the Macy conference. It's very clear from the Macy going forward into MK Ultra, but in back of the Macy conference, you have the American Jewish Committee, the AJC, which had hired virtually the entire Frankfurt School. And at the end of the authoritarian personality, which was a
don't forget the camera angle's a little off today from Zoom.
Anyway, so they were talking about how they were going to use eros as propaganda on a mass scale in the future, and I think that when you look at the depravity and the drug use and the promotion of drugs, you're actually looking at something that could well have come from, at least been flavored by, this perspective that they wanted to control population. They didn't want ethnically organized groups to exist in the United States. I mean, they had they were actually studying anti-Semitic scales, ethnocentric scales. I mean, this is just complete insanity, unless it's just very focused evil. But anyway, this is what was going on. The authoritarian personality is available for anyone to read. It's online. The conclusion talks very clearly. It makes it absolutely clear they're going to use a mass scale psychological technique, psychological technique on a mass scale, and they're going to use eros, sex and drugs. So anyway, now you have all of this, and now you have Burroughs getting ready to go on his second journey, and he kills his wife. I would conjecture that this was, obviously not an accident, but that Burroughs either believed that she knew what he was doing, or it was just done at the request of the secret society to further debauch his personality. They were going to bring his personality as a weapon into Western media. And so the idea of him being a wife murderer was actually useful for that.
And so then he had basically done all of the greatest evils.
Exactly.
Homosexuality, pedophilia, murdered his own wife, heroin addict, etc. He was the epitome of debauchery incarnate.
Right. And he was then going to be promoted as basically a kind of a new spiritual seeker. If you read the reviews of like Junkie, the Augie letters.
Back up a little bit into the camera there, Joe.
If you read the reviews, they all talk about his originality and his, how he was basically a kind of he represented the repression of civilization that he was struggling with, and then he was going to break free of it. And, he was basically a leader of kind of this existential, insanity that was being promoted. But that's why when I look at all the attributes that he has, it looks artificial to me. And so I really wonder now he had supposedly a homosexual affair with Louis Marker, which was very weird. It was just supposedly Marker didn't want to have sex with him, but Burroughs just talked him into it, and they would have sex a couple times a week on agreement. Marker died as a heterosexual. He had children. He was later stationed. The two employment that situation he has that are mentioned are Vietnam and Iran. So I think he stayed a spook all the way through his life, just based on where he was employed. But the idea that he had this sexual relationship with Burroughs is interesting to me. I would like to study this because, I talked to a friend of mine who is a therapist who deals with homosexuality and has homosexual patients. And he says that he'd never heard of anything like that before, where you'd have a deal with someone who was actually heterosexual about having homosexual sex a couple times a week just as an agreement. He said, I've never heard anything like that. So, I mean, I'm not saying I can prove this, but I'm just saying it all adds to the suspicion of the personality of William Burroughs. Who is this guy? Was it just a weaponized construct? He's the far edge. You start out, if you look how they do it, it's always incremental. You have Gordon Wasson, right? Very reliable, staid kind of gentleman. And he's the first, step into the debauchery. It's like the Beatles.
Well, even before him, Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception.
And
Aldous Huxley's this upright, high-level British author.
Exactly right. You have Huxley, then Wasson, and now the doors open. You get, very short order once it's established. Then you get Leary, and then God help us, you get Burroughs.
Yeah, so it's actually a decline as they push the agenda forward.
Exactly, and so and you can see the same thing with the music groups. Look at the cover of Rolling Stones. It has welcome Sgt. Pepper, welcome the Rolling Stones. I mean, they're basically setting the stage for the next steps of cultural debauchery, and they have to start out with very mild ones, and that's why
Yeah, and they have to make the culture think that it's organic when it's all manufactured.
And the culture won't respond. I mean, you can't bring William Burroughs as the person to bring out the first spirit drug, because he is basically a weapon that will be used later on. And so, he is out there trying to find, some way to sketch together a story, but he isn't going to be the one that's going to be on Life magazine. That's all way down line.
And then they even, as like a joke to mock the whole thing. So, okay, the beatniks were the heroin addicts, which we know, if we believe that William Burroughs was. And so we have this, and I forget who pointed it out to me a couple weeks ago. We have, it may have been John Adams or Nino or somebody from Hoaxbusters Call. But you have... now I just forgot my train of thought on this. Jeez, what was I saying there?
We were talking about how you step through the debauchery, and they had Burroughs, Ginsberg. They started out with Wasson.
Jeez, I completely forgot my point. It was a good one too. I'll get it back in a minute. Go ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to go completely tangential here for 1 second, because I've got 30 minutes to go, but I just wanted to get this in. Tomorrow is a very portentous day. I want everyone to pay attention tomorrow. I'm not saying there'll be any kind of bizarre activity, but it's the Ides of March, March 15th. If you've read Shakespeare's Secret Messiah, and I hope everyone has, you'll know that the Shakespearean literature is not what we think. And in the Shakespearean literature, the Ides of March are given a really powerful construct. It's a very important date. And in fact, if you just Google Rothschild and March 15th, you'll see all the amazing things that have happened on this date. This date has over and over again been a day where just actions that are almost unthinkable will occur, like the bombing of the USS Liberty, the founding of Israel or the city of Jerusalem, the Balfour Declaration. There's all of these things, and this is just to scratch the surface. There's all of these events, which I think are basically in the theme that Shakespeare creates in Julius Caesar with the Ides of March, March 15th. But anyway, tomorrow is a very weird day, because you've got the Federal Reserve going to make a decision about interest rates. The Dutch are going to vote on leaving the EU. And then the really bizarre thing is that it's also the date that the debt ceiling is reached in the United States. So it could be a day of a lot of interesting things. And I'm just saying is that if it is either the date that has fireworks, or leads to, because a lot of these things will set off a chain reaction that could take a week or so, maybe even longer, to blow up. But if that is the case, that this was kind of seminal in these things, folks, it's artificial. This is would be a way that you could basically, see the secret society in action. So tomorrow is a very interesting date, and pay
Peter says
attention to
it's
it.
the 15th where he's at already.
Okay, good. Well, in that case, how's it going there? Hope everything is well. But anyway, so that was my thought, and I would ask for help. If anyone knows, anything about Eddie Woods or Lewis Marker in Jacksonville, particularly the relationship to Freemasonry, anything about Eddie Woods in either counterintelligence or the CIA, anything about the Los Alamos Ranch School connection into Freemasonry, or any of the things that we've discussed, the meeting between Burroughs and Donovan, all of these things would be great. I'm appealing to the hive mind. I want to try to encourage all of us to share information. If a couple hundred people are doing research and one person has a need, then that information might be in the future being real easy, and we can make a lot more progress more quickly, and that's what we need to do.
Agreed. We forgot to mention, of course, show runs on donations. People should support Joe at CaesarsMessiah.com.
Buy the books and hit the donate button. I really do appreciate it. And Jan, how do people support you, for God's sake?
They go to GnosticMedia.com and hit the donate button, and we really appreciate it. And, I also wanted to mention that, I did talk with Zoom today, and it's a software issue from the last update, and so they have somebody working on it to hopefully bring back. So right now what we have is two little windows stuck next to each other so that Joe and I are both on screen here. So that's what's going on there. But
and I wanted to say on that, in the future, people who find our exchange valuable, are in for a brave new world, to use an expression, because we're going to be basically trying to do short updates during the week. Jan and I often, converse. And so what we're going to try to do is, if we're going to talk about something that we might think be of interest or value, we're just going to put it out real time.
Right on the fly.
On the fly.
And one thing I wanted to mention, Joe, I'm glad you brought this up, because recently YouTube changed how the subscription thing works, and you may not get a notification, but if you go on the Gnostic Media channel, when you click the subscribe thing, make sure you hit the bell right there, and it'll actually notify you when we do a live show or anything like that. So then you make sure you get notified for it.
Yeah, really important, because basically the first step to salvation here is to replace the media. It is a tip to stern weapon. I am absolutely convinced there isn't anything in it. I mean, they bought up the small newspapers, they bought up the large newspapers. They have, Clear Station, I think, has 80% of the radio frequency in the United States. And then, all of the TV networks are cesspools. So you've got basically the secret society using all of these elements, as weaponized anthropology. Now, they don't do it 24/7. They build trust up. They get with all kinds of little hokey stories and people that you like, or whatever.
Puppies and kittens. The kitten stories are really always popular,
like that. But eventually, they create enough trust, so then when they do something like 911, they can then just use the media as a way to keep people's brains from functioning, because there is this trust. So we've got to replace it. When Jan and I are starting this process of almost daily updates, it's our attempt to add to the idea of and to the system that a person can plug into. I mean, we might only chat for 10 minutes a day, or
5 or something,
whatever, even maybe 3 or 4 times a week. But when there are events that come up that deserve attention, you'll know that you'll always have our ability to be able to try to, understand them from the perspective that our research has given us. And so, it's just one little tiny network, but it'll be a way to start moving away
Sure.
from weaponized media and into
Well,
something that's
and Joe, we should really encourage the listeners to have, to spread the word, because obviously the Gnostic Media channel on YouTube is blacklisted. There's 51,000 subscribers, but we have 103 live viewers now. So what we really need to do also is encourage the audience to participate not only in the research, but also in, going back to on the pavement, on the streets, promoting, media that is actually based on investigation and research, because there's not many left out there, and many in the alt media community have been co-opted too. The CIA and the intelligence community has been going through co-opting just about every podcast that they can for the last 3-4 years that I've seen it going on.
sure. I mean, they know that the alt media is going to replace mainstream media. It's inevitable. The trends are overwhelmingly clear. So they have to try to find a way to control alt media, and they're doing it. They've got lots of shows, and people say, "Oh, well, it's horrible." There's no way we can tell up from down who's real. Look, in the alt media, there is a chance that if you use your mind and your reason, you'll be able to vet successfully people who are real,
Well,
right?
and here's the thing too. It all comes down, Joe, to really staying consistent with reality.
Yeah,
Because as long as you're consistent with reality, you can always see somebody who's trying to manipulate you or lie to you. And if you just stay consistent, and sometimes you might have to do a little footwork, check Joe and my citations, etc., and make sure we're not BSing you. But there is a whole process, and we talked about it on the show a week or two ago. Somebody asked, how do they know we're not dirty? And that's what the trivium is for. That's why you check things. We try to give you the process to go through and vet things, and you need to do it with each alternative media outlet
yeah.
as well as the mainstream media. And you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Sometimes Alex Jones is going to have legitimate information on, but you're going to have to weed through it and not just blindly accept people. But we also need to go on a point-by-point basis. And again, if somebody finds an error that Joe and I have, committed during a show, send us the citation and the information. We'll happily, update it. If you come at us, you're wrong because I'm a hippie and I love doing ayahuasca, and screw you, it's my religion. That's not evidence, and that's not going to suffice. And, we're not going to, it's not that we're just ignoring your feedback. You're ignoring our research and everything we've presented, trying to help, uplift people and protect people from this whole agenda that the CIA and MK Ultra et al., SRI, Tavistock have promoted for the last 50, 60 years, 60 plus years.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, is that when you're in the mainstream media, it's a 100% propaganda device. It's there to hurt your mind, your ability to think. In the alt media, hey, it's Wild West. There's going to be a lot of bad things out there, but you keep your wits about you, try to improve your thinking skills, and hopefully you'll come across good people, because there at least is a chance in the alt media. And in my opinion, we're winning. I mean, slow and steady, but we're winning, because when people wake up, they become skeptical to an extent that they do the process that Jan just mentioned. They actually start checking things. And once that happens, I mean, now the propaganda has to be at a whole other level of sophistication. And what happens is the people that are really trying, people that like Jan or Sophia Smallstorm, or a whole bunch of people that I can just name off the top of my head, they become just self-evident in the reality that they are trying, that this is our honest, best research, and they will stand corrected. They don't, that's one of the trademarks, is that we're always open to being exposed for having made errors. It's something that these guys can never do, or very seldom, because they just have to always maintain the
But
BS.
study the work first before you come at us and claim that there's some error, and say, hey, we won't listen to your feedback about our research that you refuse to read. So
Right.
study the work first. Show us specifically point by point what's an error and what isn't, and then we can
Yeah.
have a logical discussion on it. But don't, launch some silly attack because, again, like you like doing mushrooms or ayahuasca or peyote, and you think we're wrong because you were high on drugs and had an experience that the CIA marketed to you. And I covered the whole religious experience and hypersuggestion in my article on Theogens, What's in a Name. I recommend people read that so that they can understand just how the religious experience was sold and how it went from a psychotic and psychosis mimicking experience to a mind manifesting experience to a God generating experience. And it was CIA personnel the entire way who made up each name. Humphrey Osmond, Gordon Wasson, Carl Ruck, etc. These guys were all in on it, and I've exposed Carl Ruck plenty, and he was actually the first guest on my show back when I started in 2008. Episode number 1 was Professor Carl Ruck. I didn't know the guy was CIA and involved in all of this stuff, but that's the guy who created the word entheogen, literally. So I apologize for having these guys on early on in the show and everything, but we are doing our best to expose everything as we learn it.
It's a long, strange trip. I wanted to say goodbye to everyone. I also wanted to remind everyone, Jan, that if it gets weird tomorrow, we will come on the air, I think, if you have time. And we'll just do it tomorrow, just in case there is strange things going on tomorrow. In fact, even if there aren't, as I mentioned, Jan and I are going to try to, once we get the technology under control, we're going to try to, do a daily, perhaps no more than 5 minutes, but just depends on how long we can chat about something that's a significance. Anyway, we'll see you soon, guys. Thank you so much.
See you, everybody. Take care. Until next week.